Are you searching for answers? Discover your true identity. Stay tuned to Shalom World.
Welcome to our sharing on St. John's Gospel. We're now ready for the last piece of evidence that is in chapter 1 of John's Gospel, and that's what we call the prologue. You would have expected me to start there, but when I read it, you will realize I've been commenting on it all the time, because this is the witness of John's own church, and it's John himself. And so this is the mature witness given to Christ after all the others. You see, I started with John the Baptist because he came first in time. And then when the disciples came to Jesus, they came next. And they didn't know what John knew. So there was no point in starting with the prologue because you would be going back in time in dealing with the other witnesses. So it was a case of moving forward. So we begin with John the Baptist and then go to the disciples and then go to what John is saying. So we are now armed with enough information to actually deal with what John actually wants to tell us. Okay, but we kind of come to realize that what we have in chapter 1 is the entire gospel in condensed form. That's why I've had to introduce it so much, and why I've had to go around it in so many ways to try and deal with the amount of material that's actually there. Because John is determined that you won't read his gospel at the wrong level. If you read it on the level of below, the level of the unbelieving world, you're going to miss John's message almost completely, if not completely. So I want to remind you, and maybe the last time I hope, that Jesus operates from the level of above. He operates from a very high spiritual platform. And if you don't reach out to meet him on that platform, you're going to completely misunderstand him, because he will use all kinds of symbols that won't make any sense. And so I just want to give you a final definition of below and above. The below level, the world that rejects God and the world that opposes the Christ and the scriptures and all the rest of it, is the world of power politics. It's the world where the few control the many, and where you've got the manipulation of individuals and nations by a few people who have got enough money and enough influence. It's the world where you will meet selfishness and egotism and individualism. That world will never understand Jesus. But when you reach up to the world of above, that's the world where love and self-sacrifice and the laying down of one's life for others, and the world of union with God and wisdom and understanding, that's the world that we're invited into. And when we reach up to that level, then we do understand Jesus insofar as we've reached it, and we can grow more and more in that area. And what we're going to find is that below is called death, and above is called life. Now, Jesus speaks about life all the time, so we just need to know what we're talking about. Jesus himself is the very embodiment of life from above. He became incarnate to raise us up to that level. So the divine became human in order to raise the human up into the divine, and that's what we're actually called to. So in verses 1 to 5, we deal with the pre-existence of Christ, the pre-existence of the Word. So let's just read it for a moment. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. The Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him, all things came to be. Not one thing had its being but through him. All that came to be had life in him, and that life was the light of men, a light that shines in the dark, a light that darkness could not overpower. So there you've got this triumphant message of John and his church. So we're given the pre-existence of Christ. Now, if there was time to go into this, I'll just say to you, you will find Jesus in Genesis. You will find him in all the prophets. You will find him everywhere. Why? Because he's the Word. And it's the Word that becomes flesh. And we're introduced to the pre-existent Word is there from the very beginning, from before time. And that pre-existent Word becomes flesh, and we call him the incarnate Word of God. And then we're told immediately that he is the light of men. Now, later commentators in the New Testament take this up and say it very clearly. The letter to the Hebrews, chapter 1, verse 3, says it marvelously for me. He is the radiant light of God's glory and the perfect copy of his nature. So, just as the Word was revealed at the beginning of creation, so he's going to be revealed in all his glory now in the time of the redemption, when you've got the beginning of the new creation of man. So proclaiming Jesus' divinity here at the very beginning of his gospel, John is preparing us for the astounding statement of Jesus in chapter 8, verse 58, before Abraham ever was, I am. Now, I am, ego eimi, is what God said to Moses when Moses said, tell me who you are. God said, I am. So the great I am is the one who bears the divine name, who revealed himself to Moses in the book of Exodus at the very beginning of salvation history. So it's a fascinating thing to go back into Genesis and Exodus and find the pre-existent Word all over the place. So if you actually read the Old Testament from this angle, you will realize that Jesus was explaining himself bit by bit to all the prophets all down the centuries, so that by the time he came, they would recognize him. Isaiah, for example, told us so much about him that it was impossible that they wouldn't recognize him. It was just impossible. And we know that the Sanhedrin did recognize him, they just didn't accept him. So John says that everyone, past, present, and future, has received life from the creative Word. Okay, he's the source of all physical and spiritual life. Jesus is going to say this himself in chapter 5, verse 21. The Son gives life to anyone he chooses. And Paul underlines this in Colossians 1:16. He says, all things were created through him and for him. So because of this, the Word, the Logos, has the right to rule all creatures. Paul says in Romans 11:36, all that exists comes from him, all is by him and for him, to him be glory forever. And I have already given you his glorious return in Revelation chapter 19. So in verse 4, we're told that he is the light. Well, this is a major topic in John's gospel, that Jesus is the light. In one of John's letters, 1 John 1:5, he says, God is light, and in him there is no darkness. So the light represents the good and the kingdom of heaven. Darkness represents evil and the kingdom of Satan. So these two realms, or these two spheres of influence, or these two kingdoms, whatever language you want to use, are in contention for the souls of the human race. Darkness will never understand the light. We're going to see this as we go along. Darkness cannot imprison the light, but it will try. Darkness cannot overcome the light, but it will try. And all of us who know Jesus, like John the Baptist, must bear witness to the light. So this will become clear as the darkness tries to extinguish the light in the passion of Jesus. But what you find is that the more the darkness moved in to extinguish the light, the more the light shone in all its glory. That's the amazing thing. And the more hatred moved in to try and absolutely destroy him completely, the more love burst forth from him. To the point where the Song of Songs, chapter 8, verse 6 was fulfilled, that Jesus proved that love was as strong as death and as terrible as Sheol. This was a battle of the titans between Satan and Christ. And it is marvelous when you look at the passion of Jesus from this angle, that it is a battle between them. And the more Satan moved in to try and destroy, the more he triumphed. And that's why his final words on the cross are so incredible. I've done it. It's accomplished. I've done it. There's nothing else that can be done. It's absolutely incredible. He had paid the price to the last penny. It is really amazing. So throughout the public ministry of Jesus, what you're going to find in this battle between light and darkness is that the light wins in all the miracles and healings of Jesus, because the darkness brought all the damage. So the light actually brings it all back and restores it. The light wins in all the teaching of Jesus, because the truth and wisdom is all manifest. And the light wins in all the incarnate love that Jesus shows throughout his whole life, and very particularly in his passion and death. So after the death and resurrection and ascension of Jesus, the community of the beloved disciples go out into the darkness of the Roman Empire to shine the light of Christ on the unbelieving world. And so the journey of the light continues, and the journey of the life continues. The battle of hatred against the love continues. The victory of love over hatred continues, and so on, all down the centuries. And again, we've dealt with the fact that John the Baptist was chosen by God, but he was not the light. He was to bear witness to the light. Now, if someone has to bear witness to light, it means that there's an incredible amount of darkness around. But Isaiah had warned us about this when he told us in chapter 9 and verse 1 of his book that the people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. On the people who lived in the land of shadow, a light has shone. And in chapter 60, Isaiah told us in verses 1 and 2, arise, shine out, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. Look, even though night still covers the earth and darkness the peoples, on you the Lord now is rising, and over you his glory is seen. To me, it's unutterable tragedy that while that was actually happening to them on a daily basis during the 3.5 years of Jesus' ministry, they couldn't see. It is mind-boggling to me that they couldn't see. And it tells you about this terrifying battle between light and darkness. So Jesus, the incarnate word, came into a hostile environment. And so John and the apostles and lots of others had to bear witness to him. Now, from verse 9, the prologue says, the word was the true light. John the Baptist was only a witness. The apostles were only witnesses. The church is a witness, but he is the true light. And he is the one who enlightens all men. He was coming into the world. He was actually in the world. The world had its being through him, but the world didn't know him. You see, this is the unbelieving world. And even to this very day, 21 centuries later, the unbelieving world still talks about no God, the death of God. We've had books published on the death of God. It's incredible. The world cannot know him. They're on the wrong level. They will not rise to his level so that they can see. The world did not know him. He came into his own domain and to his own people. Now, his own domain is Israel. His own people were the Judeans. And they didn't accept him. But he wasn't rejected by everyone. All who did accept him, he gave power to become children of God. Okay. So when this incredible light came into the darkness of Israel, nobody could see it. The darkness must have been very, very thick, because light automatically dispels darkness. So if there is a bright light shining and you cannot see, there's something drastically wrong with you. Okay? And so we realize that because the light was going to be rejected and the people were not going to see, they were not going to accept all the witness given to them, we then realize that he is also going to be the suffering servant of God. Isaiah 42, verse 6 is now fulfilled. I, the Lord, have called you to serve the cause of right. I've appointed you as covenant of the people and the light of the nations. In other words, that he's the Savior of all the world. Isaiah knew he was the Savior of all the world. And you've been sent to open the eyes of the blind, to free captives from prison, and those who live in darkness from the dungeon. My name is the Lord, and I will not yield my glory to another. Isaiah was so clear. I just don't understand how they rejected this evidence. So when John the Baptist pointed to Jesus, he was pointing to God's own heaven-sent light. So the rejection of the word was going to be one of the terrible scandals of the gospel. He was rejected by the whole nation, but there were individuals who accepted him. And we know that when it came to the time of the ascension, there were at least 500 people present witnessing the ascension of Jesus. And that wasn't all who believed in him, that was just the number who assembled on that particular occasion. And we're told something amazing about these people. And, you know, in John's gospel, a comma makes a huge difference. We'll deal with that in the second half particularly. Listen to this. This is verse 12. But all who did accept him, he gave power to become children of God. To all who believe in him who was born not out of human stock or urge of the flesh or will of man, but of God himself. Now, there's one way of reading that when you leave the comma in, and that is that Jesus himself is the one that is not born of human stock or will of man, that he has become incarnate through a mighty prodigy of God. But we're going to discover when we go into chapter 3 that all who become members of the kingdom of God and who join him as beloved disciples, they too are born of God. They're not born of the will of man. And Jesus is going to say the Spirit moves where he wills. And so the baptism in water and the Spirit is a birth on the spiritual plane, that we will all be born of God. It's absolutely amazing. And then he says in verse 14, the Word was made flesh, the Logos became sarx. He pitched his tent among us, and we saw his glory. Now, John is speaking about the end of the first century when they had seen his glory. But of course, that's why I gave you the witness of John the Baptist first and the witness of the apostles, because it was going to take them so long to see his glory. They didn't really see his glory until after the resurrection. Okay. So we're going to have the individuals who actually gave themselves to Jesus, that they were going to be people who are born from above and living on the level of above, and they will be operating on the principle of love, and they will be completely opposed by hate, and they will be persecuted by hate. And so the struggle between light and darkness, love and hate, will continue in the beloved disciples. Okay. I think it is important for us to look at the fact that there is an infinite distance between Logos and sarx. I don't think we are able to take on board the leap from heaven and the extraordinary humiliation of the Son of God. I don't think so. To me, I find his humiliation in becoming incarnate, I find it quite shocking. I find it disturbing. If we sort of put up with the smallest thing, we think we're being humble. We don't know what humility is. He's the only one who knows what humility is. He left the glory of the Godhead behind him, as Paul tells us in Philippians 2, 6-11. And he left all his enormous freedom and all his privileges of divinity behind him, and he took on the limitations of human flesh. He took on the limitations of one of his own creatures. I don't think we can take this on board. It's just unbelievable. And that's why John said, eventually, it dawned on us who he was. And I think we have to persevere in reading and praying the scriptures. We have to persevere in sitting in the presence of God in order for it to dawn on us who Jesus really is. When the church discovered it, she said, "You alone are the Holy One. You alone are the Lord. You alone are the Most High, Jesus Christ." The Word was made flesh. He lived among us. We saw his glory. That glory was the glory of the only Son of the Father, full of grace and truth. That means everything that is good that comes from God comes to us through Jesus. All redemption, all spiritual life, everything comes from him. He is the one and only mediator between God and man. Everything comes from him. So I remind you again of John 14:9, to have seen me is to have seen the Father. And so we need to come to that final point that they came to at the end of the gospel, and which John gives you here at the very beginning, and that is, my Lord and my God. This is what John says in the end. Verses 16-18. Indeed, from his fullness, from his pleroma, the absolute fullness of God, we have, all of us, every soul from Adam to Zachary, past, present, and future. We have received grace upon grace from him. Since the law was given through Moses, grace and truth have come to us through Jesus Christ. Now, the law was very constricting and limited, but the grace that comes to us through Christ is absolutely unlimited love of God. And then finally, we have this wonderful, wonderful statement. No one has ever seen God. And I gave you that before, that Moses was not allowed to see God. It's the only Son who has been nearest to the Father's heart who has made him known. And so this is a very wonderful, triumphant statement of John's Gospel. In a sense, it should be given as the end of the Gospel, that having taken us through the whole journey of revealing who Jesus is and all the witness to him and the terrible battle between light and darkness and the victory of Jesus on the cross. I mean, one of the things that people don't seem to realize is that the victory of Jesus was pointed out in that very simple statement, Father, forgive them. That meant that love had triumphed over hatred, that life had triumphed over death, and that he was opening the gates of heaven to us. Okay. So John wants us to try and enter into this mystery of Christ, and to try and enter into this loving relationship with Jesus that Jesus had with the Father. And therefore, when we come back and I begin opening up chapter 2 for you, that when we begin to see Jesus beginning to manifest or to show his glory, that we will actually see all the points. And we have to be like Sherlock Holmes, looking for all the pieces of evidence and putting them together. I always say that to become a scripture scholar, you need to like jigsaw puzzles, because the scriptures give you little pieces of evidence all over the place, and when you put them together, you get the most wonderful, wonderful manifestation of truth. Thank you for listening. Slán agus Benach they live. Goodbye. God bless you.
At the end of Mass, we are told to go out and bring the gospel into our lives and witness to the gospel by everything that we say and do. It's so important that we are all out there bringing the joy of the gospel to everyone we know. And that's why I'm so pleased to endorse and offer my blessing to Shalom World TV for all that you are doing to bring good news into this world which is often sad and dark and in need of a message of hope. Thank you for what you're doing. May God bless your work always.